Okay, well, last week we started this series in which we're looking at four of the minor prophets, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, and Zephaniah. And last week we began with a sort of general introduction to the books of the prophets, looking at their place in the canon of Scripture. And we also gave a brief introduction to the book of Micah itself and looking at the background to the book and the historical setting of the book, and to Micah himself, which we know very little about. All we know really is that he was from a place called Moresheth, and looked at sort of the general
There we go.
general uh, general
Oh
message
no.
really. So let me just if people could mute themselves, please, that would help. Okay, so this evening we're going to move on to look at the text of chapter one of the book of Micah. This is the outline of the book that we're going to be following. So this evening we're in chapter one, which we've entitled "God's Sentence upon Samaria and Jerusalem." So we shall begin here in chapter 1 at verse 1. The first verse of chapter 1 says, "The word of the Lord that came to Micah of Moresheth in the days of Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, which he saw concerning Samaria and Jerusalem." So this is the heading, the introduction to the book that we have here. And the opening verse supplies us with the setting and the context of the message. Mention of the three kings of Judah here allows us to place the message in its historical context, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. And last week we looked in a little more detail at the reigns of each of those kings and the characteristics of those kings. And we sort of, with a general framework of the dating of Micah, we've placed as being around 735 to 700 BC. But we can't really be more specific. None of the messages in the book are dated any more precisely than what we have here in verse 1 of him being active during the reigns of these three kings. But the first verse there tells us that Micah saw the word of the Lord that came to him. So the word of the Lord that came to Micah, which he saw concerning Samaria and Jerusalem. So the word of the Lord came to him either in the form of a vision or of some kind of inward illumination. But what he saw, he then communicated in words which have been recorded and preserved for us. The prophet is God's spokesman, conveying to the people what God has revealed to him. And so his words are spoken with the authority of God. So he says, this is the word of the Lord that came to Micah. So this isn't Micah making this up, but this is the word of the Lord that came to Micah, which he is now passing on and delivering to others. So he's speaking with the authority of God behind what he says here. And what he says at the beginning here in verse 1 applies to the whole of the contents of the book, that this is the word of the Lord that came to Micah. We can note some other prophets as well who introduced their work in a similar way. Hosea, in Hosea chapter 1 and verse 1, begins in a very similar way. The word of the Lord that came to Hosea the son of Beri in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam the son of Joash, king of Israel. So Hosea as well begins in the same way, that it was the word of the Lord that came to him. And Zephaniah as well, in Zephaniah chapter 1 and verse 1, the word of the Lord which came to Zephaniah, the son of Cushi, son of Gedaliah, son of Amariah, son of Hezekiah, in the days of Josiah, the son of Ammon, king of Judah. So these three prophets here, Hosea, Zephaniah, and Micah, all beginning in a very similar way. And the word which Micah saw, he tells us, concerns Samaria and Jerusalem. And these were the capital cities of the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah, respectively. And hopefully on the map there you can see the location of the two cities circled there in red. And the names of the capital cities stand for the people who occupy those cities. So verse 1 is really simply a sort of introduction to the book, and we looked at it in a bit more detail last week in our introduction to the book. So we'll move on here and we'll read verses 2 to 7 of Micah chapter 1. Hear you peoples, all of you, hearken, O earth, and all that is in it. And let the Lord God be a witness against you, the Lord from his holy temple. For behold, the Lord is coming forth out of his place, and will come down and tread upon the high places of the earth. And the mountains will melt under him, and the valleys will be cleft, like wax before the fire, like waters poured down a steep place. All this is for the transgression of Jacob, and for the sins of the house of Israel. What is the transgression of Jacob? Is it not Samaria? And what is the sin of the house of Judah? Is it not Jerusalem? Therefore I will make Samaria a heap in the open country, a place for planting vineyards, and I will pour down her stones into the valley and uncover her foundations. All her images shall be beaten to pieces, all her hires shall be burned with fire, and all her idols I will lay waste. For from the hire of a harlot she gathered them, and to the hire of a harlot they shall return. So the message begins here with a call for the people to hear this. Verse 7, hear, you peoples, all of you, hearken, O earth, and all that is in it. Again, we have some other prophets who spoke in a similar way. In 1 Kings chapter 22 and verse 28, we have the prophet Micah here, not to be confused with our Micah, but in 1 Kings chapter 22 and verse 28, at the end of his message to King Ahab here, he says, and Micah said, if you return in peace, the Lord has not spoken by me. And he said, hear, all you peoples. So it's an emphasis upon hearing the message. So all of the people being called upon to hear what he has to say. The prophet Isaiah as well, in Isaiah chapter 1 and verse 2, has a similar call for the people to hear. Isaiah chapter 1 and verse 2, Isaiah's message begins, hear, O heavens, and give ear, O earth, for the Lord has spoken. So again, calling upon the people to hear. So here Micah begins in that same way. Hear, you peoples, all of you, hearken, O earth, and all that is in it. So all of the people, all of the inhabitants of the land or the earth are called upon to hear the testimony of the Lord God. The Hebrew word translated as earth here, or land, is the Hebrew word eretz, and it can refer to the whole of the earth, or it can refer to just a small piece of land. So not clear whether he's calling upon all the people of the earth to hear this, or whether he's just calling upon the people of the land of Israel to hear this. But they're called upon to hear the testimony of the Lord God. And the word title used of God here is Adonai Yahweh. Adonai is the word that's usually translated as Lord. Yahweh is also usually translated as Lord, but as the two are together here, Yahweh is translated as God. And you probably notice in your version that God is spelt all in capital letters. And whenever we find that all in capital letters, either God or Lord, it is the name Yahweh that is being translated there. So here in this case, it's Adonai Yahweh. And so the people are called upon to hear the testimony of the Lord God against those who are the objects of his anger. And in this case, that's Samaria and Jerusalem. So this is something that it's important for people to hear, and it's as if God is being called upon here as the witness for the prosecution, that he's going to make his testimony against these people. And the Lord, Micah says, speaks from his holy temple. When he says here he speaks from his holy temple, he's not referring to the physical temple there in Jerusalem, but referring to his dwelling place in heaven, which is often described or pictured as his temple. We see in Psalm 11 and verse 4. Psalm 11 verse 4 says, "The Lord is in his holy temple. The Lord's throne is in heaven. His eyes behold, his eyelids test the children of men." So there's a parallel statement there in the first part of that verse, that the Lord is in his holy temple. The Lord's throne is in heaven. So his holy temple is identified as heaven there. And then in 1 Kings chapter 8 and verse 30, which is Solomon's prayer at the dedication of the temple after the temple had been built, in 1 Kings chapter 8 and verse 30. They built the physical temple there, and then in the prayer here, Solomon says this: "Hearken thou to the supplication of thy servant and of thy people Israel, when they pray toward this place," referring to the physical temple in Jerusalem. So he's asking God to listen to the prayers of the people when they pray towards the temple. And it goes on, "Yea, hear thou in heaven thy dwelling place, and when thou hearest, forgive." So he's acknowledging that God is in heaven. That's his dwelling place. So that's God's holy temple in heaven. And in the prophet Habakkuk, in chapter 2 and verse 20, "But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him." So his holy temple here is speaking of God's dwelling place in heaven. But in verse 3, the Lord is pictured then as leaving his dwelling place in heaven, his holy temple. Verse 3 says, "For behold, the Lord is coming forth out of his place, and will come down and tread upon the high places of the earth." Notice again, Lord there is all in capital letters, so that's Yahweh. So this time it's being translated as Lord here by the translators. The Lord is coming forth out of his place. And he's pictured here as treading upon the high places of the earth. The prophet Amos, in Amos chapter 4 verse 13, has that image as well of God treading on the high places or the heights of the earth. In Amos chapter 4 verse 13 says, "For lo, he who forms the mountains and creates the wind and declares to man what is his thought, who makes the morning darkness and treads on the heights of the earth. The Lord, the God of hosts, is his name." And speaking of him there, treading on the heights of the earth. So to tread on the high places of the earth, to tread on the high places of the earth suggests the power of God. If you think of the mountains of the world, and if someone is capable of treading upon those high places, those mountains, what size must they be? It's an indication of the power of God that he is able to tread on those places. So it is really here as if the sins of the people, the sins of Samaria and Jerusalem, have stirred God into action, that he now leaves his place, his dwelling place in heaven, and he comes and treads upon the high places of the earth, indicating that this judgment is imminent. And the Lord's arrival causes a catastrophic devastation of the earth. in verse 4, he says, the mountains melt under him and the valleys will be cleft. Mountains, which are usually used as an illustration of strength and stability, will melt like the wax that melts before the fire, whilst water pours down from a high place to cause a cleft or a tear in the valleys. And we might picture this as the effect of a volcanic eruption or an earthquake that's tearing the land apart, or a landslide caused by torrential rain. Sometimes on the news we see pictures of extreme weather events and the disturbance of the earth that are caused by these sorts of events. And that's the picture that we're being given here. Of the earth undergoing this great disturbance when God comes down. Now, in the end, it will be the Assyrians and the Babylonians who will carry out God's judgment upon Samaria and Jerusalem. And this is what Micah is depicting here in this poetic language. So we're not to understand this as taking something taking place literally, of mountains melting like wax. But rather this is poetic language. This is a figurative description of what will happen when the Assyrians and the Babylonians come to carry out God's judgment upon Samaria and Jerusalem. And the reason for this devastation then is given in verse 5. He goes on to say this, all this is for the transgression of Jacob and for the sins of the house of Israel. So this is the consequence that is to come. The two capital cities of Samaria and Jerusalem are held responsible for the sins of the nations. Jacob and the house of Judah, mentioned there in verse 5. It was King Omri of Israel who founded Samaria as its capital. And we can read of that in 1 Kings chapter 16. Verses 23 and 24. 1 Kings chapter 16, verse 23 says, in the 31st year of Asa, king of Judah, Omri began to reign over Israel and reigned for 12 years. 6 years he reigned in Tirzah. He bought the hill of Samaria from Shema for 2 talents of silver, and he fortified the hill and called the name of the city which he built Samaria, after the name of Shema, the owner of the hill. So to begin with, his capital was in a place called Tirzah, where he was for 6 years, and then he buys this hill of Samaria and builds the city of Samaria there on that hill, and that became the capital. It was his son, son of King Omri, who's King Ahab, who built an altar and a temple to Baal in Samaria. If we go on in 1 Kings chapter 16, and in verse 31, we see that Ahab marries Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians, and went and served Baal and worshipped him. So he follows the worship that Jezebel is involved in. And verse 32 says, he erected an altar for Baal in the house of Baal, which he built in Samaria. So this is what's going on there in Samaria, worship of Baal. And then what's being done in the capital is being copied in the rest of the country. It's like the capital sets the pattern for the rest of the country to follow. Further on there in verse 5, at the end of verse 5 of Micah chapter 1, he asks, what is the sin of the house of Judah? Is it not Jerusalem? So he said, what is the transgression of Jacob? Is it not Samaria? So the transgression of Jacob, the land of Israel, springs forth from Samaria. And then the same with Judah. What is the sin of the house of Judah? Is it not Jerusalem? The Revised Standard Version here, which I'm reading from, follows the Septuagint when it has what is the sin of the house of Judah. Following the Hebrew text, the English Standard Version and the New International Version have what is the high place of Judah and what is Judah's high place, and the Authorized Version has what are the high places of Judah. So those versions, rather than house, they have high places. The high places were those places, usually high up on a hill or a mountain, where the shrines to idols or false gods such as Baal were located, and where the people went to worship those idols or gods. And this was an ongoing problem, both as we've seen in Israel, in Samaria there, but also in Judah as well. And even for the good kings who reigned, it was an ongoing problem because the people still went to those high places. We can see in 2 Kings chapter 12 and verse 3. This is in the reign of Jehoash of Judah, who's one of the good kings. Verse 2 says, Jehoash did what was right in the eyes of the Lord all his days, because Jehoiada the priest instructed him. And then verse 3 says, nevertheless, the high places were not taken away. The people continued to sacrifice and burn incense on the high places. And then in chapter 15 and verse 35, in the reign of Jotham, and Jotham is king, well, first king mentioned it by Micah there in verse 1. We read this last week, I think. Jotham, another good king, nevertheless, the high places were not removed. The people still sacrificed and burned incense on the high places. Then King Ahaz, one of the bad kings, in 2 Kings chapter 16, verse 4, we see the high places here in his time when he was involved, personally involved in them as well. He sacrificed and burned incense on the high places and on the hills and under every green tree. So it was a big problem, both in the northern kingdom of Israel and in the southern kingdom of Judah as well. So that the sin of both Samaria and Jerusalem is this idolatry, that they have become these centers of idol worship. And this is why judgment is to come upon them. The judgment and destruction to come upon Samaria now is foretold in verses 6 and 7. And God is the speaker in these verses, saying what he will do to Samaria. Amos, in Amos chapter 6, verse 1, had pronounced a woe upon a woe to those who feel secure on the mountain of Samaria. People had felt safe in Samaria, secure, but as the warning is here, that it will soon be destroyed. It will become a heap in the open country. It will be like a pile of stones, and its site would become a place where vineyards could be planted. So in verse 6 he says, therefore I will make Samaria a heap in the open country, a place for planting vineyards. To plant vineyards, you have to clear the land. Isaiah chapter 5, verse 2 describes the process of planting a vineyard and the work that is needed in order for the vineyard to be planted. In Isaiah chapter 5, verse 2, talking of the vineyard here, he digged it and cleared it of stones and planted it with choice vines. So if Samaria is to become a place for growing of vineyards, it will have to be cleared. The land will have to be cleared of the stones. So that's the image that is being being portrayed there, this clearing of the city so that a vineyard could grow there. Samaria was built on a hill, and the stones of the city will be poured into the surrounding valley, so exposing the foundations of the city. The picture on the screen there is of the ruins of Samaria as they can be seen today. And you see the walls torn down and the foundations there. So the warning here is that Samaria will be razed to the ground. It will be left totally deserted and desolated. And the images and the idols which were once worshipped in Samaria would be destroyed. They will be beaten to pieces and laid waste, showing the powerlessness of these idols that the people had been worshipping, that these idols could not save them, could not prevent this from happening. And the wealth that had been amassed in Samaria through idolatry is pictured here as the wages from prostitution, and it will be burned with fire, taken away, never to return. It will be taken by their enemies to be used in the same way in which it was acquired. Verse 7 in the New International Version translates this way: She gathered her gifts from the wages of a prostitute. As the wages of prostitutes, they will again be used. So idolatry is pictured here as a spiritual fornication, because it is unfaithfulness to God. It is as if the city of Samaria has been living off immoral earnings, and now it's all going to be lost. These words of verses 6 and 7 would be fulfilled when the Assyrians came against Samaria and first of all besieged it under King Shalmaneser V, and then destroyed it under King Sargon II. There was a transition period there between the death of Shalmaneser V, who started the siege of Samaria, and Sargon, who succeeded him, who finished it off. That's in 722 to 721 BC. And the account of the fall of Samaria is given for us in 2 Kings chapter 17, verses 1 to 6. 2 Kings chapter 17, verses 1 to 6. In the 12th year of Ahaz, king of Judah, Hoshea the son of Elah began to reign in Samaria over Israel, and he reigned 9 years. And he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, yet not as the kings of Israel who were before him. Against him came up Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, and Hoshea became his vassal and paid him tribute. But the king of Assyria found treachery in Hoshea, for he had sent messengers to So, king of Egypt, and offered no tribute to the king of Assyria, as he had done year by year. Therefore the king of Assyria shut him up and bound him in prison. Then the king of Assyria invaded all the land and came to Samaria, and for 3 years he besieged it. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria captured Samaria, and he carried the Israelites away to Assyria and placed them in Hala and on the Habor, the river of Gozan, and in the cities of the Medes. So there's the account of the fall of Samaria and the fulfillment of Micah's prophecy here in verses 6 and 7. If we read on now to the end of Micah chapter 1, from verse 8 down to verse 16, we have here the prophet's lament over this. For this I will lament and wail, I will go stripped and naked, I will make lamentation like the jackals and mourning like the ostriches. For her wound is incurable, and it has come to Judah, it has reached to the gate of my people, to Jerusalem. Tell it not in Gath, weep not at all. In Beth Le'Aphra, roll yourselves in the dust. Pass on your way, inhabitants of Shaphir, in nakedness and shame. The inhabitants of Zaanan do not come forth. The wailing of Beth Ezel shall take away from you its standing place. For the inhabitants of Maroth wait anxiously for good, because evil has come down from the Lord to the gate of Jerusalem. Harness the steeds to the chariots, inhabitants of Lachish. You were the beginning of sin to the daughter of Zion, for in you were found the transgressions of Israel. Therefore you shall give parting gifts to Moresheth Gath. The houses of Achzib shall be a deceitful thing to the kings of Israel. I will again bring a conqueror upon you, inhabitants of Mareshah. The glory of Israel shall come to Adullam. Make yourselves bald and cut off your hair for the children of your delight. Make yourselves as bald as the eagle, for they shall go from you into exile. So the announcement of the destruction of Samaria causes the prophet to lament. It says in verse 8, "For this I will lament and wail." And he says that he will go stripped and naked. That is having the appearance of one who is a captive or one who has been taken prisoner. Isaiah describes, or Isaiah was required to dress in that way as a message to the people of his time in Isaiah chapter 20, verses 2 to 4. And remember, Isaiah is working at the same time as Micah. So in Isaiah chapter 20, verse 2, at that time the Lord had spoken by Isaiah the son of Amos, saying, "Go and loose the sackcloth from your loins and take off your shoes from your feet." And he had done so, walking naked and barefoot. The Lord said, "As my servant Isaiah has walked naked and barefoot for 3 years as a sign and portent against Egypt and Ethiopia, so shall the king of Assyria lead away the Egyptians captives and the Ethiopians exiles, both the young and the old, naked and barefoot, with buttocks uncovered, to the shame of Egypt." So it was a message for Egypt that they were going to be taken into captivity. Isaiah dressing in that way. And this is what Micah says here in verse 8, that he will go stripped and naked. So he'll have the appearance of one who is a captive or a prisoner. And he says that he will lament like the jackals and mourn like the ostriches. The Authorized Version translate that as dragons and owls, but really jackals and ostriches is a better translation. And this is a reference to the wailing or the mourning sounds for which these animals were well known. We see the ostriches and jackals mentioned in some other places as well, in Job chapter 30 and verse 29. Job lamenting over his condition as well. He's like, "I am a brother of jackals and a companion of ostriches." Again, from Isaiah chapter 13 and verse 21, which is a message of judgment to come on Babylon. But wild beasts will lie down there, and its houses will be full of howling creatures. There ostriches will dwell. And then Isaiah 34 and verse 13 also. Isaiah 34:13. Thorns shall grow over its strongholds, nettles and thistles in its fortresses. It shall be the haunt of jackals, an abode for ostriches. So the jackals and the ostriches are often mentioned there together in that sort of idea of desolation. One traveller in the region noted the sound of the ostrich, saying, "During the lonesome part of the night, they often make a doleful and piteous noise. I have often heard them groan as if they were in the greatest agonies." Micah is describing here his lamentation and groaning over what has happened here. And the sin of Samaria has gone so far that it is likened to an incurable wound. He says in verse 9, "For her wound is incurable, and it has come to Judah. It has reached to the gate of my people, to Jerusalem. So the sin of Samaria is like this incurable wound that nothing can be done for it. And now it has spread, it has come to Judah, and it has infected Jerusalem. He says it has reached to the gate of my people, to Jerusalem. So the sins of the northern kingdom have infected the southern kingdom. And if that's the case, then the southern kingdom can expect the same punishment, the same judgment that is to come on the northern kingdom. The reference there to my people, he says it has reached to the gate of my people, to Jerusalem, may suggest that the one who is lamenting here is God. As God was the speaker in verses 6 and 7 as well. It may be a continuation of God here. But the prophet is expressing God's lament, God's grief over what has become of his people. And this is the deepest grief is being felt because of this. Well, the judgment on Judah is pronounced here in verse 10 to 16. And in describing the desolation that is to come upon Judah, the prophet makes a clever play on words with the names of several of the towns that he lists here, predicting what they will become when the invasion comes upon them. Ellison, in his book Men Spake from God, makes this comment on this passage. He says this contains the longest sustained play upon words in the Old Testament, the names of the places, probably all in or near the Shephelah, being chosen for that purpose. This play on words doesn't really come out very well in our own translations, but we'll make note of that as we go through the text here and notice how that works out. But it's a very clever device that Micah is using in this. No historical context is provided for us for these events that he's speaking of here, and the invader and the conqueror is not named, which would make this applicable to both the Assyrians and later to the Babylonians who came in and carried out these things. So verse 10, he says, tell it not in Gath, weep not at all. Gath is the nearest Philistine city to Judah, just across the border, and Gath would take malicious joy at the news of Judah's destruction, and so it is not to be reported there. And the people of Judah are told not to weep, so that the people of Gath will not get to hear of this and to know of their grief. So if the people of Gath don't know what has happened, then they'll have nothing to rejoice over. There's a similar expression to this that is used by David in his lament over the deaths of Saul and Jonathan in 2 Samuel chapter 1, verses 19 and 20. David, lamenting the death of Saul and Jonathan, says, Thy glory, O Israel, is slain upon thy high places. How are the mighty fallen? In verse 20, he says, Tell it not in Gath, publish it not in the streets of Ashkelon, lest the daughters of the Philistines rejoice, lest the daughters of the uncircumcised exult. So David is saying the same thing here. Don't tell the Philistines what has happened, otherwise they will rejoice over it. We don't want them to be doing that. And this is, Micah is using the same expression here. Tell it not in Gath, weep not at all. We don't want the Philistines taking any pleasure in this. And then the second place mentioned in verse 10 there, in Beth-le-Ephra, roll yourselves in the dust. And this is where the play on words comes out here. Beth-le-Ephra means house of dust. So what he's saying is the inhabitants of the house of dust are to roll themselves in dust. And rolling in dust is a sign of sorrow or shame. The Jewish Study Bible, the notes on the text here puts it this way: in dust house I will roll myself in dust. And then in verse 11, pass on your way, inhabitants of Shaphir, in nakedness and shame. And the name Shaphir here means beautiful. So the inhabitants of the beautiful city will be put to shame. So their condition is going to be reversed. And again, from the notes in the Jewish Study Bible, they put it this way: pass on your way, girl of pretty town, in shameful nakedness. And then the inhabitants of Zeanan do not come forth. And Zeanan means go or come forth. So the inhabitants of Zeanan are told not to come forth from their city. Perhaps they can't come forth because they're being besieged, or they will not come forth in order to fight. And then it goes on to say, the wailing of Beth Ezel shall take away from you its standing place. Beth Ezel means house of nearness or neighbor town, suggesting the nearness of the invader. So Beth Ezel will not be able to provide a standing place, perhaps for refugees coming from other cities. So this neighbor town will not be able to be a good neighbor in helping others. And then verse 12 says, for the inhabitants of Maroth wait anxiously for good, because evil has come down from the Lord to the gate of Jerusalem. The name Maroth means bitterness. So the inhabitants of bitterness are hoping for good to come, but instead evil is at the gate of Jerusalem. And again, taking the notes of the Jewish Study Bible, puts it this way: the girl of bitterness town aches for good, yet evil has come down from the Lord to the gate of Jerusalem. And then in verse 13, harness the steeds to the chariots, inhabitants of Lachish. You were the beginning of sin to the daughter of Zion, for in you were found the transgressions of Israel. So here's Lachish, and then Lachish may be a city associated with the horses that are mentioned here. They are to harness their horses to their chariots, perhaps in readiness to flee. And the city is identified here as one of the first in Judah to become involved in the transgressions of Israel. You were the beginning of sin to the daughter of Zion. Lachish was captured by the Assyrian king Sennacherib, mentioned in 2 Kings chapter 18. And the siege of Lachish and the capture of the city is depicted on the relief, which can be seen in the British Museum. And the picture on the slide there is from that. It's a picture of King Sennacherib receiving the surrender of the city of Lachish. And then in verse 14, therefore you shall give parting gifts to Moresheth Gath. So the inhabitants of Lachish will have to pay a parting gift or a dowry to the town of Moresheth Gath when it is taken by the invaders and they are taken away into captivity. And of course, Moresheth Gath is Micah's hometown. This is where he's from. The houses of Akzib shall be a deceitful thing to the kings of Israel. And Akzib means deceitful. So Akzib will be a deceitful or a false hope to the kings of Israel, or the kings of Judah, who are trying to stop the invader. Again, from the Jewish Study Bible, the note on this says, the houses of Deceptionville shall be a deception to the kings of Israel. And then in verse 15, I will again bring a conqueror upon you, inhabitants of Mareshah. Mareshah means possession. So Mareshah will become a possession for the conqueror whom the Lord will bring upon them. So the town of, we might say the town of possession will be dispossessed, and it will become the conqueror's possession. And then the glory of Israel shall come to Adullam. The glory of Israel may be a reference to Israel's army, or the nobility, the royal family and the nobles, or to her wealth, or to the Lord himself. Sometimes God is referred to as the glory of Israel. But they shall flee to Adullam. And Adullam was the location of the cave where David had hidden when he was being hunted by King Saul, mentioned in 1 Samuel chapter 22 and verse 1. Adullam was later a city that was fortified by King Rehoboam as well. And then verse 16, the conclusion of this section, says, "Make yourself bald and cut off your hair for the children of your delight. Make yourself as bald as the eagle, for they shall go from you into exile." So this section concludes here with the prophet calling upon the people to make themselves as bald as the eagle or the vulture. The word can mean either an eagle or a vulture, and to cut off their hair. And the cutting off of the hair would be a sign of mourning and grief over the loss of their children in the destruction that is to come and the exile that they will have to endure. So they are to act like a bereaved mother over the loss of her children, the children who had brought her joy, for the children of your delight. And for Judah, this will most likely mean the Babylonian exile, for they shall go from you into exile. They'll be taken away. So it's a prediction of what will happen in the future. Babylon isn't named here, but later in chapter 4 and verse 10, Babylon is named as the place where they will go. "Writhe and groan, O daughter of Zion, like a woman in travail, for now you shall go forth from the city and dwell in the open country. You shall go to Babylon." And that's really what is being predicted here in these final verses of Micah, where he goes through the names of these towns and makes this play on the names of the towns to show what the situation is going to be like. So finally, for this evening, a summary of all of this, of chapter 1. The prophet begins by calling upon all of the people to hear this. This is important and they need to listen. That the Lord will come from his holy temple to bring about his judgment, first upon Samaria, representing the northern kingdom of Israel, and then upon Jerusalem, representing Judah. And the sin of Samaria is idolatry, and her images will be destroyed. And the prophet will mourn over Samaria's demise, for her incurable disease has now spread and reached Jerusalem. And then using this play on words, the prophet shows how the various cities of Judah will suffer when the invader comes and when the people will be taken away into exile. So we'll stop here for this evening. And next week we will go and look in chapters 2 and 3, I think. But if anyone has any thoughts or comments, please feel free to speak or write. I'll have a look in the chat here and see